The sun had barely risen over the Aegean, yet its light fell upon a land that no longer bowed. For 400 years, Greece had lived in the shadow of an empire, its language whispered in secret, its faith kept alive by candlelight, and its poets dreaming of liberty in chains. But in 1821, those whispers turned into war cries. Peasants, priests, and poets, united by faith and fire, dared to defy the mighty Ottoman Empire. Theirs was not just a rebellion, it was the resurrection of a nation thought long dead. You are watching Erahive, where history speaks. If you enjoy journeys through forgotten eras and untold human struggles, make sure to like this video, share it with history lovers, and subscribe, so you never miss the stories where history truly speaks. The weight of 4 centuries. For 4 long centuries, the land once known for philosophy, art, and freedom lived beneath a foreign crescent. The Ottoman conquest had turned the cities of Athens, Thessaloniki, and Constantinople into provinces of an empire whose reach stretched from Arabia to the Balkans. The Parthenon, once a symbol of the gods, became a powder magazine. Churches were turned into mosques. Greek nobles bowed to Ottoman governors, and the proud descendants of Leonidas now paid heavy taxes to survive. Yet the soul of Greece did not die. In the dim candlelight of hidden monasteries, monks taught children to read forbidden verses of Homer and the Gospels. These secret schools, Scholia, kept language and faith alive when both were punishable acts. Fathers whispered to sons about the glory that once was Hellas, and mothers sang lullabies not of princes, but of heroes who would one day return. The Ottoman system, though vast and powerful, was built on hierarchy: Christians as subjects, Muslims as rulers. Greek peasants tilled the soil for others, sailors served under Ottoman flags, and countless boys were taken by the devshirme, the blood tax, raised to fight against their own kin as janissaries. Every generation felt the weight of a forgotten homeland, carried not in banners, but in silence. Still, the spirit of defiance flickered in mountain villages. The Klefts, bandits to the Ottomans, but heroes to the people, roamed the hills of the Peloponnese and Epirus, raiding tax collectors and hiding in stone monasteries. Songs were written about them, songs that spoke of courage, loss, and the dream of freedom that refused to die. In European capitals, intellectuals began to look back at Greece not as a province of the East, but as the cradle of the West. The Enlightenment rekindled admiration for ancient Athens and Sparta, and slowly, whispers of liberty crossed the Aegean once more, carried by merchants, students, and exiles who had tasted freedom abroad. 400 years of oppression had not erased Greece. It had tempered it, forged a nation in waiting, and soon that quiet endurance would erupt into something unstoppable, a revolution that would remind the world that empires may conquer land, but never the human will to be free. Sparks of rebellion. Freedom rarely begins with armies. It begins with ideas, whispered in taverns, carried in letters, hidden in poetry. By the late 18th century, Greece's yearning for liberty had found its voice again. The Age of Enlightenment had reached even the furthest corners of Ottoman rule, and the Greeks who studied abroad began to see their homeland not as a province, but as a sleeping nation. In Vienna, Paris, and Moscow, educated Greeks gathered in secret. They read Voltaire, Rousseau, and the stories of the American and French revolutions. If France could rise against kings, they thought, why not Greece against an empire? And so, in 1814, in the Russian city of Odessa, 3 men formed a society that would change history: Filiki Eteria, the Friendly Brotherhood. Its founders, Nikolaos Skoufas, Athanasios Tsakalov, and Emmanuel Xanthos, were merchants, not soldiers. But their weapon was secrecy. They swore oaths before icons, vowing to unite all Greeks under one purpose: to restore their fatherland. The Eteria spread like wildfire. From the ports of Smyrna to the monasteries of Mount Athos, its members multiplied. Their messages were written in coded language. A fisherman's greeting might be a revolutionary sign. Priests, merchants, farmers, and sailors joined the cause. Some sought freedom, others sought revenge for centuries of humiliation. But rebellion was dangerous. Ottoman spies were everywhere, and discovery meant torture and death. So the Eteria looked north, beyond Ottoman reach, to the Danubian principalities, Moldavia and Wallachia, where Greek influence remained strong. There, a man named Alexander Ypsilantis, a former officer in the Russian army, took command of the secret movement. Ypsilantis Ypsilantis dreamed of a coordinated uprising. The Greeks in the north would rise first, sparking the fire that would spread south into the Peloponnese. He believed Russia, an Orthodox power, would come to their aid. It was a gamble, a fragile hope, but it was enough. By 1821, the whispers had grown into a storm. Letters crossed the Aegean, coded in prayer and poetry. In churches, priests blessed the faithful with words that carried more than faith, they carried defiance. The old order trembled, unaware that the very people it had silenced were about to roar. The revolution had not yet begun, but the air was heavy with it, like the stillness before lightning strikes. 1821, when silence broke. The year was 1821. Winter still lingered over the mountains of the Peloponnese when, for the first time in 4 centuries, Greek hearts beat not with fear, but with fury. The whisper of freedom had become a roar. In February, Alexander Ypsilantis crossed the Prut River into Moldavia, raising the banner of revolution. He told his followers that the moment had come, fight for faith and fatherland. But the dream was premature. The northern rebellion faltered, crushed beneath Ottoman reinforcements and Russian disapproval. Ypsilantis was forced to flee, his army scattered, yet his defiance lit the fuse for something greater in the south. In the Peloponnese, word of uprising spread like fire through dry grass. Priests blessed weapons beneath church icons. Farmers turned plows into spears. The first gunshots echoed in the mountains of Kalavrita, and soon Mani, Patras, and Kalamata joined in revolt. The flame could no longer be contained. On March 25th, Bishop Germanos of Patras is said to have raised the flag of freedom at the monastery of Agia Lavra. Whether legend or truth, the symbol mattered more than fact. For the Greeks, that day marked not merely rebellion, but resurrection. Villages erupted in chaos. Ottoman garrisons, isolated and stunned, found themselves surrounded by people they had ruled for generations. The city of Kalamata fell swiftly, and its liberation became a rallying cry across the land. Everywhere the cry was the same: Eleftheria y Thanatos, freedom or death across the Aegean. Islanders too took up arms. Hydra, Spetses, and Psara, proud seafaring islands, turned their merchant fleets into warships. Their cannons roared against Ottoman vessels that once dominated the Mediterranean. For the first time in centuries, the Greek flag flew proudly over liberated harbors. The uprising had begun not with great armies or foreign aid, but with faith, fury, and the memory of a nation that refused to vanish. And as news of rebellion spread across Europe, the question would soon arise: could this small, scattered people truly defeat one of the mightiest empires on earth? The answer would come in blood and fire. Fire and blood. Revolution is never clean. For every flag raised in triumph, there is a village burned to ash. The Greek War of Independence was no different. A storm of courage and cruelty, faith and vengeance. At first, the Greeks seized the advantage. Ottoman garrisons were small, scattered, and unprepared for the fury that erupted around them. By the summer of 1821, much of the Peloponnese had fallen to the rebels. The ancient city of Tripolitsa, seat of Ottoman authority in the region, was besieged. When it finally fell, rage drowned reason. Years of oppression exploded in a day, and the massacre that followed left thousands dead. It was a brutal beginning to a brutal war, one that would soon see horrors on both sides. The Ottoman Empire struck back without mercy. Their wrath fell upon the innocent as much as the armed. In April 1821, in Constantinople, Patriarch Gregory V, spiritual leader of the Orthodox world, was seized and hanged at the gate of his own cathedral. His body, left swinging before the city, became a grim warning and a symbol of martyrdom that stirred every Greek heart. Then came Chios. In 1822, Ottoman forces landed on the peaceful island, once a jewel of commerce and learning. Within weeks, its beauty turned to horror. Tens of thousands were killed or enslaved. Entire families vanished into the slave markets of Smyrna and Istanbul. Only ashes and silence remained. But the massacre of Chios did something the Ottomans had not foreseen. It moved the world. Across Europe, artists painted the suffering, poets wrote laments, and common people wept for a nation they had never seen. Lord Byron, the English poet, wrote that Greece was not dead, but sleeping. and soon he would sail to join the fight himself. Through fire and blood, the Greek struggle became more than a local rebellion. It became a moral cause, a war not just for a people, but for an idea that even after centuries of darkness, freedom could still be reborn. And as Europe began to turn its gaze toward the Aegean, the war entered a new phase, one of heroes, betrayals, and the fragile hope that liberty could survive its own chaos. Revolutions are born from unity and often undone by it. Once the initial euphoria faded, the Greek struggle for independence began to fracture under its own weight. What had started as a war of liberation soon became a test of loyalty, ambition, and survival. In the Peloponnese, Theodoros Kolokotronis, a warrior forged in the mountains, emerged as a national hero. He had fought as a bandit, a soldier, and now as a general of the revolution. His cunning ambushes crushed Ottoman forces at Dervanakia and Valtetsi, securing Greek control of the region. To many, he was the father of victory, fearless, devout, unyielding. But heroes often walk alone. In Nafplio and Hydra, politicians and ship owners clashed over power. While soldiers bled on the front lines, leaders in provisional governments argued over titles and authority. Some saw the revolution as a holy war, others as a political opportunity. And soon the dream of unity began to unravel. By 1823, two rival governments emerged, one in Kranidi, another in Tripolitsa. The First Greek Civil War erupted even as Ottoman armies regrouped. Brother turned against brother, and precious resources meant for the front were spent on infighting. Kolokotronis himself was imprisoned by his own countrymen. The man who had led Greece to victory now branded a traitor to the revolution he helped ignite. The Ottomans saw their chance. They called upon one of their most formidable allies, Muhammad Ali Pasha of Egypt. His son, Ibrahim Pasha, landed in the Peloponnese in 1825 with a modern army, disciplined, trained by Europeans, and merciless in its mission to crush the Greeks once and for all. Villages burned again. Missolonghi, under siege for nearly a year, became a symbol of resistance and tragedy. When food and hope ran out, the defenders chose death over surrender, charging the enemy lines in a desperate exodus that turned the town into a graveyard of heroes. The revolution seemed doomed, torn apart from within and pressed by unstoppable force from without. But sometimes, even in defeat, a nation's courage can awaken the conscience of the world. And far beyond the Aegean, in the drawing rooms of London, Paris, and St. Petersburg, whispers began to change into plans. The great powers, once indifferent, were about to act, and the destiny of Greece would no longer rest in Greek hands alone. By 1826, the revolution was on the brink of collapse. The Peloponnese burned under Ibrahim Pasha's campaign. Its villages turned to ash, its people enslaved. Athens itself, cradle of civilization, fell once more to Ottoman control. To the world, it seemed the dream of Greek freedom was dying. But beyond the battlefields, another kind of war was being fought, one of hearts and minds. Across Europe, Greece had become more than a nation. It was a symbol, the ancient birthplace of democracy and art, now fighting for its right to exist. Philosophers, students, and ordinary citizens felt that to let Greece perish was to betray the very soul of civilization. This was the dawn of Philhellenism, the love of Greece. In Britain, Lord Byron sold his estates to fund the revolution. He sailed to Missolonghi, not as a poet, but as a soldier. There, among starving defenders, he spent his final days organizing aid, dying of fever before ever seeing the victory he helped inspire. His death shook Europe, a martyr not born of Greece, but reborn through it. In France, Eugène Delacroix's painting, The Massacre of Chios, hung in Paris galleries, confronting the elite with the horror of Ottoman reprisals. In Russia, Orthodox faith bound hearts to their Greek brethren, and across the continent, volunteers, weapons, and funds began to flow toward the Aegean. For the first time, the great powers, Britain, France, and Russia, saw more than sentiment. They saw opportunity to curb Ottoman dominance, to extend influence, and to reshape the balance of power in the Mediterranean. Politics met compassion, and together they turned the tide. In 1827, at the Conference of London, the powers agreed to intervene. They would compel the Sultan to grant autonomy to Greece, by diplomacy if possible, by force if not. But diplomacy failed. The Ottomans refused to yield. and the stage was set for confrontation. On the waters of Navarino Bay, the fate of the revolution would be decided not by words, but by cannon fire. October 20, 1827. The waters of Navarino Bay lay calm beneath a pale sun. But beneath that calm waited history's turning point. Anchored within the bay was the combined Ottoman-Egyptian fleet, nearly 80 ships strong, and sailing toward them under the flags of Britain, France, and Russia came an alliance that had grown weary of watching Greece bleed. What began as a mission of peace enforcement would end as annihilation. The Allied admirals, Codrington of Britain, de Rigny of France, and Haydn of Russia, intended to negotiate. But when a spark of confusion ignited among the ships, diplomacy gave way to thunder. A single musket shot, no one knows from which side, set off a storm of fire that the world would never forget. Cannon smoke blanketed the sea. Flaming masts fell like meteors into the waves. The roar of broadsides echoed across the Peloponnese as wooden hulls splintered and men cried out in terror and faith. By sunset, the bay was a graveyard. More than half the Ottoman fleet burned, shattered, or sunk beneath the crimson tide. It was a massacre, yet a miraculous one. The Greeks had not fought that day, but their future had been rewritten in smoke and flame. For the first time, the power of Europe had intervened not to divide a nation, but to free one. When news reached Constantinople, fury consumed the Sultan, but it was too late. The Ottoman navy, his empire's pride, was gone. And across Europe, bells rang in triumph. What had begun as a forgotten rebellion now stood as a war of liberation sanctioned by heaven and history alike. The tide had turned. The Turks could still fight on land, but their grip on Greece was slipping fast. Cities that had fallen began to rise again. The blue and white flag, once a symbol of defiance, now became the banner of destiny. And yet, even as the guns fell silent, the final struggle would not be fought on the battlefield, but across the polished tables of diplomacy, where freedom's price was to be negotiated by those who had never fought for it. When the smoke cleared over Navarino, the war's outcome was no longer written in blood, but in diplomacy. The Ottoman Empire, once master of Europe's southeast, now faced an impossible truth. Its hold over Greece was broken, but victory did not come swiftly. Years of devastation had left the land scarred and starving. Towns lay in ruins, families scattered, and whole generations lost to exile or war. Yet from this ruin rose something immortal, a will to live as a nation once more. Under European pressure, negotiations began. At first, the Ottomans offered limited autonomy, hoping to keep Greece under their shadow. But Britain, France, and Russia, driven by their own rival interests as much as by principle, pressed harder. The people who had suffered so much demanded nothing less than freedom. In 1829, the Russian army marched deep into Ottoman territory, forcing the empire to the peace table. The Treaty of Adrianople recognized Greek self-rule, and a year later, the London Protocol of 1830 made it official. After 4 centuries of silence, Greece was free. The ancient nation had returned to the map of the world, but independence came with compromise. Instead of a republic born from its own struggle, the great powers chose a monarchy. A young Bavarian prince, Otto of Wittelsbach, was crowned the first king of Greece. It was not the ending the revolutionaries had dreamed of, yet it was freedom nonetheless. Fragile, imperfect, but real. As the new kingdom rose from rubble, its people began to rebuild. Villages once burned by Ibrahim's army echoed again with church bells. Children learned openly in Greek, no longer in secret by candlelight. The Parthenon, battered and scarred, stood once more as a symbol not of loss, but of return. The dream that had survived 4 centuries of darkness had finally found the dawn. And though the Greece of 1830 was small, bordered by uncertainty and debt, its victory echoed far beyond its shores. To every people still living under foreign rule, the message was clear. Freedom may be delayed, but never denied. The guns of Navarino fell silent long ago, but their echo still drifts across the Aegean, in the wind that sweeps through the ruins of Messalongi, in the bells of churches once forbidden to ring, and in the songs sung by children who no longer whisper their language in fear. The Greek War of Independence was more than a struggle against an empire. It was a battle battle for memory, the right to remember who they were. For 4 centuries, Greece had lived in shadow. In 8 years, it stepped back into the light. Yet freedom, once won, is never simple. The young kingdom faced poverty, corruption, and foreign interference. But it also faced something greater, a future, and that alone was victory enough. The war awakened Europe's conscience and lit a fire that would spread across the 19th century, from the Balkans to Italy, from Poland to Latin America. It reminded the world that history, though written by empires, is rewritten by those who dare to dream beyond them. So when you see the blue and white flag ripple against the Aegean sky, remember, it is more than a symbol. It is the breath of a people who endured 400 years of silence and still found the strength to sing. This was the story of the Greek War of Independence, the birth of freedom after centuries of night. You are watching Erahive, where history speaks. If you enjoyed this journey through history, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and join us next time as we uncover another chapter where the past still speaks to us all.